the sole purpose, we have, at least for now, changed our name once again. So we apologize for any confusion on that. But all the channel, we didn't change the channel. All this, if you're following us already, you're still following us. We just, it's corny. This is real. I mean, it's nice, and we are talking about the soul and our purpose in life, so it very much works. Yeah. And our only purpose, our sole purpose, works. It's very a good name, I think. Hans came up with it, and the answers of life also was a lot to type out, and I think sole purpose will be easier for people to type. People will remember it, so that's cool too. Anyway, we changed our name, and we are going to go ahead and get into Beyond Illusion and Doubt today to finish up this book. We've been doing a little less readings lately, but we do want to still at least finish the books we started, and then we'll see how much more readings we do, but at least we want to get these done. So we're going to read Schopenhauer, which is chapter 8 of Beyond Illusion and Doubt, by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And who wants to read for
the Skipley?
Sure.
The Skipley.
All right.
I don't remember.
The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, 1788 to 1860, took some of his ideas from the Indian Vedic literature, but many more from Buddhist writings, and he ended up espousing an atheistic and pessimistic doctrine. Srila Prabhupada shows how his idea of nirvana, extinguishing one's will, is self-defeating and ultimately impossible to achieve. For Schopenhauer, this is the disciple, that was the introduction. Mm-hmm. This is the disciple speaking now. And we won't say it each time just to get the flow going, so when he's speaking it is Srila Prabhupada answering, and when I'm speaking it will be the disciple. Or the student, for anybody that doesn't know that word.
The Padawan.
So well. The Padawan, the Padawan and Jedi Master.
Luke and Yoda.
Yeah. For Schopenhauer, happiness meant inactive satisfaction, nirvana, since he thought that the will to enjoy the material world is the irrational urge that brings about all suffering. He advocated the extinction of the will. In his main book, The World as Will and Idea, he wrote, "The Indian Vedas and Puranas have no better simile than a dream for the actual material world, which they called the web of Maya, and they use none more frequently. From this, Schopenhauer concluded, life is a long dream. What is this world of perception but my idea? He goes on to conclude that life is a projection of the will."
Just put that on the side there. Oh, okay. Sorry. I have to take that out. Yes, material life is a projection of the material will, or material desire. And nirvana means that material desires are finished. But the living entity cannot be desireless, because he is an eternal spiritual being. Thus, even when he finishes his material desires, he still has spiritual desires. In the materially conditioned state, these spiritual desires are covered by material desires. But in any case, desire is the constant companion of the soul, or the living entity. The soul transmigrates in this material world from one body to another, and he creates desires according to the types of body he gets. God's supreme will affords the living entity various bodies, so that he can fulfill his minute will, which is made up of material desires. In other words, the living entity wills something, and the supreme will, God or Krishna, understands the finite will of the living entity, gives him facilities to fulfill his particular desire, and in this way, the will of the living entity is the cause of this material existence. However, Schopenhauer was wrong in thinking that you can become happy by extinguishing your will. Since you are a living being, you must always have desires. Even the desire to not have a desire is a desire. It's interesting. If your desires are stopped, you become like a stone. So instead of trying to put an end to all desire, you should try to cleanse the diseased form of desire. Sarvapadi vinirmuktam. That cleansing process is Krishna consciousness, or bhakti. Presently, our desires are desires of the body. When the living entity acquires the body of an American, a European, a Chinaman, or whatever, he desires like a human being. When he changes his body to that of a dog, he spends his time barking. According to his desires, he has received a particular type of body, but these desires are temporary, and thus the living entity moves from one body to another. Because he is materially covered, he considers the temporary world to be reality. But because it is constantly changing, it is not. Therefore, in one sense, this material world is all a dream.
And trying to enjoy this dream is the source of frustration?
Yes, because it is a fact that we cannot fulfill our material desires, which come and go like dreams. All material activities, subtle or gross, are manifestations of various dreamlike desires. Therefore, the impersonalistic Mayavadi philosophers say, Brahma Satyam Jagan Mitya. The dreamer is a fact, but the dream is false. Our Vaishnava philosophy agrees that the dreamer is the factual living entity, but we say that the dream of this material world is not false, but temporary. Therefore, the dreamer has to come to the real, eternal spiritual platform, so that his flickering material dreams can be extinguished. As explained in the Narada Pancharatra, Sarvapadi Vinirmuktam Tatparatvenam Nirmalam Hrishikena Hrishikesha Sevanam Bhakti Uchyate. Bhakti, or devotional service, means engaging all of our senses in the service of the Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Master of all senses. When the spirit soul renders service unto the Supreme, there are two side effects. He becomes free from all false material designations, and his senses become purified. When one abandons the dream and awakens to reality, that is Krishna consciousness, or bhakti.
Then will, or desire, can never be annihilated?
No. The Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, text 5, states that we cannot live for a second without desires. Because we are living entities, we must will and desire at every moment.
What about the Buddhists? They advocate a state of desirelessness.
They believe that if you dismantle this material body, there will no longer be will, desire, or suffering. But that is not a fact. The fact is that you are an eternal spirit soul. You do not die after the destruction of the body. Consequently, thinking, feeling, and willing are actually carried from this body to another body in the process of transmigration. When the body dies, the living entity's will carries him away, and according to the quality of his will, he receives another body. That body may be the body of a demigod, a dog, a human, or whatever. In any case, will or desire is the carrier.
Schopenhauer was greatly influenced by some of the Vedic writings. He wrote, "Every keen pleasure is an error and an illusion, for no attained wish can give lasting satisfaction. All pain rests on the absence or passing away of such illusory pleasure. Thus both pain and pleasure arise from defective knowledge. The wise man, therefore, holds himself equally aloof from joy and sorrow, and no event disturbs his composure."
Sounds like a Jedi Master, man. Well, but yeah,
Yeah.
In this material world, people say, this is good and that is bad. But actually, there is no question of good and bad, because everything material is on a temporary platform. Also, the Bhagavad Gita states that the pains and pleasures experienced in the material world do not touch the spirit soul. When a spirit soul is under the illusion that he is his material body, he becomes concerned with the body's pains and pleasures because he thinks that those pains and pleasures are his. But this is not a fact. Therefore, Krishna advises, Matra sparshas tu konteya sitoshna sukadukada agamapayano nityas tamstitikshas varata. O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and their disappearance in due course, are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O scion of Bharat, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, text 14. Since pleasures and pain come and go in due course, they are not the reality. So why bother about them? If I feel pain, let me tolerate it and go about my business of serving Krishna. Damn. My back pain is all temporary.
Yeah. I know, all this stuff is.
I know.
Schopenhauer saw happiness in the world as at best a negative state, simply a momentary suspension of suffering. That's the other thing, what you just said. Even pleasure is so temporary because just the absence, like if you enjoy yourself a lot doing something, the absence of that thing will then bring about some form of, whether it being minute or not,
Yeah,
like,
you're
it's like you can easily hanker for that, like, it's over now, it's not so exciting now, whatever. Like, none of this is permanent, and that alone brings about suffering. Like, your desires, even if you fulfill them, they only last for so long till you want more things that you don't have.
Yeah, I feel like Christmas season is the perfect like summation of that.
Yeah.
You know, you spend the whole holiday season, it builds and it builds and it builds, and everyone's like, yeah, Christmas is here, and on Christmas Day, it's like you almost like if you go out and about, especially after New Year's Day. You know, you can still ride the high from like Christmas to New Year's. But after New Year's, it kind of feels like everyone's like, no. And then again, build up. Christmas season's here. Like, it's like, that's crazy. The doldrums of Maya.
Right?
Okay.
The doldrums.
Yes, that is explained by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sometimes when a man is to be punished, he is held under the water to the point of suffocation. Good old waterboarding. Then he is let up, and when he can finally breathe, he thinks, happiness at last. But he is then immersed in the water for another period of suffering. So the point is that real happiness means to be relieved of suffering permanently, not just for a few moments.
Yeah. Schopenhauer felt that the greatest crime of man was that he was ever born. That's quite the thing to
dark.
say, right?
God.
Goodness.
That's all right, but when you understand that there is a crime, you must understand that there is someone to punish you for that crime. If you suffer because of that crime, you must understand that there is someone who has judged you to be a criminal.
Schopenhauer would disagree. He wrote, "Human life must be some kind of mistake." And because he thought the world mad or irrational, he concluded that it could not possibly have an author. He believed that if there were a God, he would have set the world in order.
We have certainly experienced that there are madmen in the world, but there are also hospitals where such men can be treated. The world may be mad, but God is providing hospitalization and treatment, the process of Krishna consciousness. Unfortunately, Schopenhauer had no knowledge of the hospital or of the treatment. He speaks of sinful life, but he does not accept the judge who gives the punishment for sinful life. He sees that the world is mad, but he does not know the treatment for madmen.
In The World as Will and Idea, Schopenhauer wrote, "If we narrowly analyze the reality of our body and its actions, we find nothing in it except the will. With this, the body's reality is exhausted." He goes on to state that the genitals are the focus of the will. Okay.
As I said before,
Goodness.
One wills in accordance with his body. We should understand that we have nothing to do with this material world, which is the production of the material will. We are spiritual, and when we will spiritually, we are Krishna conscious. When we will materially, we get different types of material bodies. It is true that the basis of material life is sex. Yan maitunadi grihamedi sukam hi tucham. Oh God, I butchered that. Okay. The basic principle of those who are addicted to the material world is the insignificant pleasure that comes from maituna, sexual intercourse. The strong desire for sex will continue as long as we are in material existence, because sex is the center of all material pleasure, plus you need it for procreation.
Yeah.
However, when we get a taste of spiritual pleasure in Krishna consciousness, we can give up sex. Param dristva nirvartate. By experiencing a superior pleasure, we can give up an inferior one.
Schopenhauer considered sex to be selfishness, whereas real love means sympathy.
Sex is animalistic. It is not love, but lust. Sex simply means the mutual satisfaction of the material senses, and that is lust. All of this lust is taking place under the name of love, and out of illusion, people mistake this lust for love. Don't you love how Krishna just... Did you see the I figured you didn't watch it yet because I sent it to you this morning, but the lecture of Bhakti Swami.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet.
It's literally transforming lust into love. And you're like, I had not looked at this, but jabam.
Yeah, and also when we do our little Star Wars philosophy video, we talking about how the lust, Anakin's lust, not his love, was what led him to the dark side. So it's all just coming right out.
Yeah. I try to like have an idea of what I want to talk about, and then just let it kind of
happen.
Flow, because it's like you can't prepare better than Prabhupada. Jesus Christ.
No.
Okay. All this lust is taking. Okay. One who has real love. I'll go back a little bit. All this lust is taking place under the name of love, and out of illusion people mistake this lust for love. One who has real love, love for Krishna and for all living entities, or for anyone else that is not Hare Krishna, love for God and for all living things. You know, what we want to talk to Cato about too. So
love for Krishna and for all living entities.
Yeah, we should,
that's what he's covering there. He's saying that.
I'm sorry. God. People are suffering from a lack of Krishna consciousness. Let me do something for them so that they can understand the value of life.
Schopenhauer considered that immoral Schopenhauer considered that immoral acts result from a sense of egoism.
Yes, that is so. To be immoral means to avoid surrendering to the will of Krishna. Immoral people think, why should I surrender to Krishna? Krishna is an ordinary person like me. Such thinking is demonic. Rascals cannot understand that by surrendering unto the supreme will and satisfying the supreme will, they can attain salvation.
Schopenhauer felt that it is possible to crush egoism and desire by love.
Yes, but we must direct that love towards Krishna. If I do not love Krishna, I cannot surrender to him. And if I do not surrender to Krishna, my false egoism will continue. So the more you love Krishna, the more your surrender is perfect. But when there is a lack of love, the mentality by which you can surrender will not develop. For instance, if you have some love for me, you will carry out my orders. There is no question of forcing you to surrender. Or to take the example of a child. A small child naturally surrenders to his parents because there is a love for the parent. In the same way, the living entity is free to love Krishna or to reject him. Without freedom, there cannot be love. Therefore, Krishna consciousness means learning to love Krishna. Holy moly, I need to send that to Shara because we were talking about that the other day.
Yeah, it's really nice. Schopenhauer looked on love as compassionate sympathy for one who is suffering. Through his compassionate love, we can lose our selfish desire. Yeah, the idea of real love is exactly why we do have the option to be here and pursue our own temporary ends.
Yeah.
Because we have to have that freedom to actually love him. We can't just be forced to love him. You know,
yeah, and that's why the concept to me of this whole, if you don't choose God, you're gonna burn in hell kind of mentality, it doesn't click with me because I think that's an abusive relationship. That's like the parent telling the kid, if you don't listen to me, I'm gonna beat the crap out of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. The fact that we have free will and that we choose to surrender to God makes it that much more beautiful. Because otherwise, it's like in Shrek.
It also makes it real love, not selfish. His love is not
real.
Selfish.
Yeah,
his love would have to be selfish for him to take it so badly that he's going to make you burn in hell for eternity. Now, you might have to suffer for your reactions. You might have to get reactions for your actions, but it's not going to be that you can never make it back to him just because you didn't do it in this life, because that's not love. That's not a loving God.
It's not love.
That's a spiteful God who decided, you didn't want to love me? Then bye. That's like if you go through a breakup and you kill the other person because they don't want to love you.
Yeah.
Like that's not love.
I'm gonna wreck their life.
Right. Destroy everything that they own, burn down their house, whatever. Do some crazy crap. Destroy their car. Like that's not love. That's spite. That's whatever.
Yeah. And how can, for the idea of this all-loving God, all-powerful, it doesn't. I think that's why a lot of people more now tend to either be agnostic or just kind of like, I guess maybe I believe in God, but I don't know. And it's because I think a lot of religious organizations today portray this sense of like, the authoritarian dad, not the best friend. And I think that's why this clicks for me so well, is like the Vedic teachings portray God as he is the supreme father, the supreme mother, but also the supreme best friend.
For sure.
And I think that's what's missing in a lot of other teachings.
Yeah.
It's there, but not a lot of people talk about it.
I mean, yeah, if you read the passages, it's clear that he's compassionate and loving, but then you get to the end and it's like, oh, but by the way,
we're going to take things out of context.
There's a limit. There's a limit to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it drives people away.
Yeah.
Or it can anyway.
Oh, you read Schopenhauer looked on love.
Yeah.
Okay.
Through this compassionate love, we can lose our selfish desire.
Yeah. Why should we love those who are suffering, but not those who are enjoying?
Schopenhauer saw everyone as suffering.
We agree that everyone within the material world, the material nature, is suffering. Therefore, Krishna descends and speaks the Bhagavad Gita to deliver all fallen souls. Similarly, a Vaishnava takes sannyas, the renounced order, out of compassion for others, because the sannyasi's only duty is to preach the message of Krishna consciousness. People in this world are suffering because of ignorance. They think, oh, now I have a nice car, an apartment, and a girlfriend, therefore I am happy. Actually, this is not happiness, but suffering. Because the Vaishnava loves Krishna and understands that he is part and parcel of Krishna, he realizes that the conditioned living entities are suffering for want of Krishna consciousness. Therefore, out of compassion, the Vaishnava takes sannyas and goes forth to preach. Wow.
Schopenhauer saw the pleasures of this world as ultimately frustrating.
If he had taken his frustration seriously, it might have made him successful.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Wow.
Just say that. Put it out there.
That's like show one of them pirate ships pulling up alongside and just full broadside, all cannons.
Yeah.
Da-da-da-da-da.
All batteries fire.
Oh my god. I receive many letters from frustrated students who understand that frustration is hell. Eventually, they come to understand that they should seek real shelter, Krishna consciousness. So frustration is really not so bad. If you are put into a dangerous position and you know how to save yourself from it, that very danger can become a source of pleasure for you.
In The World as Will and Idea, Schopenhauer wrote, "Eternal becoming, endless flux, characterizes the inner nature of will. Finally, the same thing shows itself in human endeavors and desires, which always delude us by presenting their satisfaction as the final end of will. As soon as we attain our desired objects, they no longer appear the same. Therefore, they soon grow stale or forgotten, and we throw them aside as vanished illusions."
Yes, all this is going on, and therefore the living entity acquires one body after another.
Schopenhauer saw everyone going through a constant transition from desire to satisfaction, and from satisfaction to a new desire. For Schopenhauer, it is this flux from desire to satisfaction that characterizes the will's activities in the phenomenal world. Outside this flux, he thought there is only nirvana, extinction of the will.
That's not a fact. One has to understand that behind the will and its satisfaction is a person who is willing. Schopenhauer did not take that person into consideration. He considered only the will and its satisfaction. It is the individual soul who is willing. If the soul succeeds in stopping this flickering willing, what next? Even the stopping of the will is temporary. You may stop one kind of willing, but you will adopt another kind of willing and another kind of satisfaction. We must understand that behind the whimsical will is the spirit soul. When that spirit soul understands his real identification as the eternal servant of Krishna, or God, his will is purified. One should not be satisfied by simply annihilating the whimsical will. One should understand the real will of the real person. That is the beginning of spiritual life. It sounds like here, when he says will, he's meaning the mind. Like, it seems like Schopenhauer was
confusing
merging
the will
the
with
soul
the mind.
with the mind.
Which is
Whereas
what a lot of
Prabhupada's
people
trying
do.
to differentiate, that's the mind.
Yeah.
The soul is not something flickering.
There's
the
something
mind is
beyond
the
the,
flickering.
there's something within. The mind is just a part of the material body.
Yeah. It will not help simply to negate the temporary material will. One has to will in reality, and that is his eternal willing. That is Krishna consciousness. In the material world, the living entity directs his will towards sense satisfaction because he has forgotten the spiritual field of willing. When the same will is directed towards satisfying the senses of the Supreme Krishna, that is the eternal willing of the living entity. Jivera Swarupa Haya Krishnera Nityadas. When one comes to the platform of real knowledge, he understands that he is the eternal servant of God. When we concentrate our will on how to serve God, we attain our real position of eternality, bliss, and knowledge.
Schopenhauer apparently believed in life after death. He wrote, "If a man fears death as his annihilation, it is just as if he were to think that the sun cries out at evening, 'Woe is me, for I go down to eternal night.'"
Yes, because the will is eternal, death is not the stoppage of life. One simply gets another body. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Tata dehantara prapti. When the body dies, the soul transmigrates to another body. This is the proof that the life of the person is eternal. And because the person is eternal, his desire and will are also eternal. But Schopenhauer did not know what that eternal willing is. The eternal will of every living entity is to serve Krishna always.
Schopenhauer looked on Indian philosophy as a philosophy of the denial of the will. Well, we just talked about the whole, the sun example that Schopenhauer wrote.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've talked about this before, but just to kind of throw this out there too, it's the idea of reincarnation is, if you look at nature, like we've talked about,
mm-hmm.
the cycles of the seasons, the sun and the moon,
mm-hmm.
the cycles of, rain versus, there's so many cycles. Everything in nature is a cycle. Why would birth and death be any different? You look at nature, there's so many examples that everything moves in cycles. Even the ages, we understand, and I think that's a big thing too, because like you've pointed out, that a lot of people think of time, and it's kind of natural to think of time because of the way we experience it, as a line
mm-hmm.
moving forward, but it's a wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why everything is a cycle. Even time is a cycle. We're repeating these yugas. The yugas are just so vast.
Yeah, they're outside of our perception.
Ages for another. Outside of perception, you're not going to live through more than one age. You're not going to live through enough yugas to be able to be like, oh, I can see it now. But eventually, it's going to go back to the first yuga, and we're in the last yuga now. Things are deteriorating. It's just the situation that we're in. But it's a cycle, and therefore you see the cycle. And why would we be outside of that cycle? There's so many examples that make you think. At least, even if you're I don't know, I think, again, like Raghunath says on the Wisdom of the Sages podcast, could be.
Yeah.
I think that's a very good thing, to at least be willing to entertain it. There's so many examples.
Well, especially when there's no hard evidence
that
showing to the
true.
contrary.
Right. At least be okay, well, maybe.
Yeah.
And give it enough thought to at least consider it, because there's so many cycles. It's not like this is the first cycle you're hearing of in the material world.
Dead material, and the
mm-hmm.
dead material becomes food for
yep.
living organisms.
Yep. That's another cycle.
That right there just, the body dies, and then what happens?
The body decays.
Worms and maggots come out of it. In a way, there, life is coming from death.
It can feed plants, which then eventually maybe you're using as a paper towel, or you're using as food again.
Yeah.
Everything is this idea, reuse, recycle. The world is recycling itself, and therefore we are also, in a sense, being recycled into new containers.
Our living energy is being recycled.
Our soul is going through these different material containers, but our soul is remaining untouched by this material energy.
No, that's a great.
And that's a really good. Yeah, I think that's just a good thing to keep in mind, and that sun example really jumped.
No, the sun is, because death is what? Darkness.
Yeah,
you don't remember anything, and you come back up.
Yep.
New day, new set of everything.
Literally.
It's very. I feel that that's the supreme irony. Krishna, or Prabhupada sometimes calls Krishna, the supreme prankster, the supreme trickster, jokester, right?
Yep.
I think what's so beautiful and so clever and ironic is that, like you said, in the world all around us, the cycles are literally screaming at us from everywhere if you choose to look at it. And it's like he's screaming, over here!
Yeah.
And we're just la 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 la, so I feel like when people then say, show me God, or why can't I see him? But it's if you're willing to look, you can see his action in the world around you. Who are we to think that we're qualified to say, God, I want to see you right here and now? That would imply that you're more powerful than him.
Yeah.
Why does he have to obey that?
Yeah.
My own kid doesn't obey me when I say, hey, come here, please. I need your help doing something.
Yep.
How are you going to expect the Lord of all creation to come and... But at the same time, if you're approaching him in the right way, he will be there for you.
Yeah,
That's
but
the really
you're the
crazy
one
thing.
choosing to ignore him, basically,
Yeah.
is what's going on. Yeah.
Okay.
Schopenhauer looked on Indian philosophy as a philosophy of the denial of the will.
But he did not study Vedic philosophy and religion perfectly. He simply had some idea of some portions of the impersonalistic and Buddhistic philosophies. Evidently, he did not know about Vaishnavism. Although he touched the Bhagavad Gita, he did not study it thoroughly. There, Krishna tells Arjuna that if he simply tries to attain knowledge of God, or Krishna, his will and his life will be purified, and he will return back to the Godhead upon giving up his body. In the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Janma karma chame divyam evam yo veti tatvata fyakta deham punar janma naitimam eti surjuna. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. Either Schopenhauer did not study the Bhagavad Gita very thoroughly, or he could not understand it for want of a real spiritual master. Shots fired again there, damn. According to the Gita itself, one should go to a bona fide guru who has actually seen the truth. Schopenhauer simply speculated on the basis of his own experience, and consequently, although everything is there in the Bhagavad Gita, he could not see it. And that's really important right there, is you need the qualified teacher. That some Joe Blow off the street reading a neurosurgeon's textbook and thinking, I can go do neurosurgery now. No, you're not.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
It's kind of a weird example, but I even had something like this where commonly it is said you shouldn't put coffee grounds down the sink, right? But I found, and this is a weird example.
A recurring theme in our life, isn't it?
But I do it, and I've actually found that it helps to unclog sinks. There's been times when my sinks have drained slowly. Putting a little extra coffee grounds down there and rinsing it well actually helps. The acidity of the coffee helps to wash things down. With the grain of salt of when you Google it, because people that I've dealt with in my life have Googled it and been like, you're wrong, it's not what it says on Google. If you read the headlines, if you read a lot of these little articles and you only read part of the articles, it does appear that you should not do it. Because a lot of the stress is on, don't put stuff down your drain. As plumbers don't want you putting anything down your drain. Like, just don't do it. Like, just put it somewhere else. Because they don't want to deal with it when it gets clogged up or whatever. However, if you read them like word for word, there are sections in some of these articles where, like, towards the end of one of the articles, it was basically the whole article saying, don't do it, it'll cause a clog, blah, blah, blah. At the end of it, it says, there are some plumbers who say you can put coffee grounds in the sink. But it's like the last little paragraph. They throw away a paragraph at the end. So if you only read the first half, you're going to come away from that, like, again, without a teacher to explain the why of it. And even earlier in that, it says, coffee grounds and grease are the bane of whatever. Like, it basically says coffee grounds and grease. And they're not saying individually. Because the next sentence says, even if you don't put them down at the same time, they can still meet up in the pipes and cause, a problem. So they're very clearly saying when coffee and grease combine in your drain, it's a problem.
That's when it's a problem.
But you could easily read that if you're not reading that thoroughly, it's gonna just appear like coffee and grease independently could be a problem. If you're not properly reading, if you're skimming through and just reading, and I think that's what his saying here is now that's a silly example because again, I'm sure coffee could clog your sink. I wash it down really well. I rinse it down with hot water. I don't just run it for 2 seconds. I make sure to get it through the pipes. I usually do it before I wash my dishes, so there's a lot of water going down. So it's a very different system than just throwing it down the drain and walking away. I also don't have a garbage disposal, which it could destroy. There's a lot of elements, that you have to take into account. You can't just be like, well, I'm just going to put all my coffee down the sink, whatever. But the thing for me is when he talks about needing a spiritual master, I think it's really potent because, you're reading the Bhagavad Gita, you could read the Bhagavad Gita and get a whole wrong message, just like you could read an article and not quite get the full message. You can read, maybe, the 80% of that article is kind of saying, just better be safe, don't do it. But there's part of it where it kind of admits that if you did it in a certain way, if you flush it with plenty of water, it'll be fine. But you have to read the whole article to get that. And you realize grease is a combination of it, so you got to be careful not to put them down anywhere near each other. And if you put grease down, you should be rinsing the crap out of it too to get it down before it congeals and becomes solid in your pipes. So there's a lot of elements to understand. It's not just on the surface level. You could say just don't do this. Just like the Bhagavad Gita kind of gives us some guidelines. Don't do this, do this. And the surface level is very easy to just follow this checklist. But there's a reason for the checklist. You have to understand behind the checklist, or else you're never going to be able to problem solve and to get out of this material world. Just like when you get work sometimes there's something that's outside of the checklist you've been given for your day-to-day job. How do you make that decision how do you know? Because you have a good teacher, because you've learned why these are the items that we normally do. Why do we normally have to do this in this order? Because what happens if you're doing something medical and there's an order and things are normally done, and maybe for special circumstance you have to do it in a different order. If you don't understand why you're doing the things that you're doing and you're just following a checklist for this, and this, you could end up hurting people, killing them, not serving them effectively in the medical field because you're not understanding the purpose, the purport, the reason. And that's what the spiritual master gives you, is like, here's the reason we do this. Here's the reason he's saying this. If you look at this other place, you'll see he says it again slightly differently.
They're like the Wikipedia,
and you kind of put it together and, now I get it. And it really leads you down that path so that for yourself, you can figure out how to live life and get out of this material creation. And you need that guidance. You need someone who's studied and studied and studied, who served somebody else who studied and studied and studied. They're all servants, and they're just passing on that message. Not someone who thinks they know everything and is gonna, there's this fine line of where to get the information from. And this is a good point, because Schopenhauer read the Bhagavad Gita, and like he said, apparently he did not understand it very well. And
that's
easy to do.
very true.
It's a lot to read.
It's no different than going to like a therapist. If you're wanting to do, get mental health help, and you're just looking up, web articles online, it will help you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you don't even know where to start, or you're reading all this stuff and don't know how to apply it, it's literally a waste of your time.
Yeah.
Not quite, but when you need a therapist,
it can actually be harmful.
No, but then when you meet a therapist or a psychoanalyst or whoever, and they get to know you and they get to hear the problems, the personal problems you're going through, the things you're struggling with, they can apply the vastness of knowledge to a custom tailored experience for you. However, you got to be careful. Like the guru you approach needs to be someone bona fide, because when people are coming to a guru, they're in a very vulnerable state.
Sure.
You're seeking someone. You're essentially surrendering, and you're surrendering yourself to this person, but this person is not just a person. They represent God.
Right.
And
you're
so
turning to the wrong person.
Exactly. So now you're opening yourself up, and that's
Scary.
how you end up getting these people, these freaking crazy whack-out cult leaders that lead all these people astray, because they were imperfect. They were not. They weren't bona fide gurus. They were using this knowledge, which is very powerful, to sway less intelligent people or less educated people under them, or sometimes very educated people, but they were so persuasive.
Yeah.
And it's very dangerous, it can be very dangerous.
If you pick the wrong parts to quote, again, if you only quote certain aspects of things, you can get completely different messages.
Yeah, totally.
You can quote just a couple lines from here and a couple lines from there and make it sound like the message is completely different, but if you read it out of context, that's the problem, is reading it out of context.
Yeah.
Like, you have to understand
or
the full
thinking
context
that,
of the situation.
like with Prabhupada, there's many letters he's written to different people where he's telling people different things.
Yeah.
And when many people will say, well, Prabhupada said this. Well, Prabhupada actually said this.
Yeah.
And it's like, sounds like he's contradicting himself, but it's like, wait a second.
Yeah.
And this is crazy to me, because I feel like, not in our faith, but just in general, in religious circles, it seems that like people really take things out of context, because the spiritual path requires such a commitment. I think there's a tendency to harbor the baggage with you of, I'm surrendering my life to this, therefore it has to be right, because I made this decision.
Right.
So anything that contradicts that or makes you squirm a little bit, you're gonna freaking get out the big guns, because you don't want to think that you made the wrong choice.
People don't want to be wrong about little things.
Yeah. What to speak about?
Like coffee down the drain. what to speak of,
soul down the drain.
like what to speak of something major like that. I mean, you people, we hold on to these little things, and. Yeah, I mean, the coffee down the drain thing is my current standpoint. I could be wrong. One day I might clog my sink with coffee. That's the other part of it. It's like, again, I am a fallible individual, but I learned from somebody who did plumbing, and he told me that that's actually a thing that people think it's not, but that he explained the flushing of the water and the grease and all that. So I understood that there was context for why some other plumbers don't do that. But again, maybe in 10 years I'm gonna clog my sink. But even that I don't want to be wrong about, right? I don't want to be wrong. I'm like, no, that's what I'm doing. Now I have found that it works for me. I have some ground for it, but there are probably 80% of plumbers that tell you not to do it, and I'm like, no, I'm right.
Was that an intentional pun there, or was that accidental?
What?
You said, now I may have some ground for it.
Oh, that was an accidental pun.
I wasn't sure if I was like, wait,
No, that was accidental.
Okay.
No, but now I know why you're laughing. I was like, I didn't think it was that funny. But
No, it's just funny because you're going off on your coffee spiel. Again.
yeah. Well, I know, but
No,
again,
it's
like it
true,
is funny
though.
because
It
even like that is like, oh, now I looked it up and feel that I am right, but even that, like I looked it up to see if I was right. You know, like there's an
Exactly.
attachment to
You
be
wanna
right.
protect your,
People protect their ego about all these things.
See, I told you,
Right,
guys.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why there is like you, and of course you do that with major things. You do it with little stuff.
If you do
You
that
do
with
that
coffee
with, yeah,
grounds-
exactly. You're gonna be doing that with all kinds of things,
Yeah.
and at least try to be conscious of where you're doing that, and so you can reel it back when it needs to be reeled back.
True.
Because if you're not even conscious of it, if you just think if you're so deep in it that you just can't even realize that that's what you're doing, that you're making yourself right, there's gonna be problems that come as a result of it, and that's relationship problems, whether it be friendships, parent, child, sibling, romantic relationships. All of that is gonna come into play with that, and if you're not careful. And at least, like, there's ways to communicate it without it seeming so overpowering and, like, I have to be right. But even that, like, how often are we making ourselves right? Like, and try to reel it back a little bit. Because it's so easy to do it. We walk into a situation assuming we're right. And, I mean, what else are you going to do? That's the knowledge you currently have, right?
Yeah.
But when someone presents different knowledge to you, realizing that you can take a step back and analyze it before doesn't have to be wrong. Basically, what you're doing is making people wrong so you can be right. Don't be attached to being right.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean accept things that are super false and be like, no, yeah, you're right, I'm wrong. But you can at least not be attached to being right long enough to see and establish and examine the evidence being presented to you.
you can hear them. You can hear them out politely and try to understand where they're coming from.
And not just politely, but honestly thinking, what if this is right? What if I'm wrong?
Yeah.
Like being unattached to the being right. And then if you still land on like, I don't know about all that, that's fine. But the attachment to being right is often what causes people to butt heads. Both people really want to be right, whereas as opposed to those kind of conversations where you're saying, well, I think this, and when you're able to be open like that, you can have a conversation and disagree, like we did with Cato the other day, where we don't agree on everything, but we have a lot of similarities in our beliefs, and we're able to talk about it in a way that's like non-confrontational.
Yeah, no.
Because neither one of us is attached to having to be the one in the right. Because which one of us is going to be right about everything?
Yeah.
What's the point of learning in your life if you're right about everything already? You're not. There's things you don't know. There's things you misunderstood. There's things you're wrong about. And that's really important for us to analyze when we're talking to people and interacting with people.
For sure.
Because how many times you walk into a room and are like, I already know everything. And that's going to affect the way you deal with people in the room. Versus walking in and being curious about what you don't know, about the people in the room, about what they think. When you lose that curiosity because of how right you are, you're automatically losing out on relationships.
Well, you're making your world really small.
Yep, that too. You're not learning anything new. All right, we should get back to this. Finish this up.
No, that was good, man. I'm gonna stop you those.
According to Schopenhauer, why can't I say his name? Schopenhauer, the man of knowledge is imperturbable in any condition. He wrote, such a man would regard death as a false illusion, an imputed specter which frightens the weak, but has no power over him, who has no power over him who knows that he is himself the will, of which the whole world is the objectification or copy, and that therefore he is always certain of life.
This is contradictory. On the one side, Schopenhauer has a desire for the certainty of life, and on the other, he says that nirvana, annihilation, is the only answer. Man, just chopping right to the root.
Yep.
Which does he want? He simply tried to adjust things to fit his theory, but he couldn't understand the philosophy behind the purification of the will.
Apparently, he had no other solution other than the suppression of the will.
But that's not possible. In order to be happy, you must change the quality of your willing through purification. The purification process is bhakti, chanting and hearing the name, qualities, and pastimes of the Lord, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu. That purifies the will. Schopenhauer misses the point. Although he accepted the fact that life is eternal, he thought that its purpose is nirvana, putting an end to the will. Unfortunately, he did not know what nirvana is. Nirvana means putting an end to the whimsical will and coming to the platform of willing in Krishna consciousness.
For Schopenhauer, there were three means of salvation: aesthetic, ethical, and religious. Through aesthetic salvation, contemplation of the Platonic ideals, We rise above passion through poetry, music, and art. Through the contemplation of these higher ideals, we reach a plane of desirelessness.
This is not a new idea. It is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, Param Dristva Nivartate. The students of this Krishna consciousness movement have abandoned their abominable living habits because they have received a better life with superior thoughts, philosophy, food, song, poetry, and art. When the mind is filled with Krishna consciousness, there is no chance of it engaging in the contemplation of nonsense.
For Schopenhauer, aesthetic salvation is a temporary experience. For instance, when one looks at a beautiful painting, he transcends the lower levels of consciousness and for a few moments becomes will-less or desireless.
Yes, we agree that this may be the case, but we wish to remain in that higher consciousness continuously, not momentarily. This is possible if we practice. By practice, a child learns to read and write, and thus he becomes educated. It is not a momentary thing. Wow.
That's good.
If we practice Krishna consciousness daily, lower consciousness will automatically vanish. Yowza. For instance, we worship the deities in the temple. That is actual aesthetic salvation. But unless you apply the aesthetic sense with reverence and respect, you cannot derive benefit from worshiping the deities.
According to Schopenhauer, you achieve ethical salvation by attempting to satisfy your will. When you satisfy your will, no new desires can arise, and you experience happiness.
Apart from the individual will, there is the supreme will. If we satisfy the supreme will, we are happy. But we cannot know the supreme will directly, and therefore we must approach a spiritual master. Our philosophy is that by satisfying the spiritual master, the representative of God, we satisfy the supreme will. Yasya prasada bhagavat prasada.
For Schopenhauer, the third and most effective type of salvation is religious salvation. He felt that by denying the will through asceticism, you can attain the state of nirvana, nothingness.
But Schopenhauer did not know that since the soul is eternal, willing is also eternal. Although the will may be suppressed for some time, for instance, after death, when a living entity enters a mother's womb, for instance, after death, when a living entity enters a mother's womb, he spends 9 months developing his next body, and there is a temporary suspension of the will. But when he emerges from his mother's womb, he resumes the willing process. Death simply means a suspension of the will for a few months, that is all. If you fail to train your willing process properly, you have to suffer life after life. But if you train your will properly to serve Krishna's supreme will, then you can go to Krishna's supreme planet immediately after death.
Wow.
Damn.
That's good. Perfect. Well, we already kind of did this in discussion throughout, so yeah. I think we'll go ahead and end this episode here. We're around the 50-minute mark, maybe a little less, so it's pretty perfect episode length. Thank you guys for listening. If you don't forget to, share, like, follow, subscribe. Definitely send to someone. Sharing is going to help our podcast. If you do like the podcast, share with somebody else that you think may also enjoy it. Yeah, sharing is caring. So, share the sole purpose with others. And also in your own life, if you are at least interested to even contemplate, it can be nice to have people who are in your life also contemplating it so you can discuss with people that you know and care about. So just let us know and, send it to somebody that you like. We appreciate you guys listening.
Yeah, having conversations about this kind of stuff, I feel like it can bring a lot of depth to the relationships in your life.
Yeah.
Even if you guys are not in agreement, just having the discussion about
it's really powerful, and it's something. It's one of the few things. It's probably the only real thing that's worth contemplating in this life, even though we distract ourselves with so much other contemplation. So we really appreciate you guys listening, and hopefully we'll continue to grow here and get better and more informative for you guys. We're doing a lot of these readings mostly in an attempt to get our own selves where we need to be, and we're just kind of sharing that journey with you. So thank you, and you guys can still write to us if you want, comment, DM, slide into our DMs. We'll be happy to communicate with you. Thank you guys very much. Hare Krishna.
All right.
And
don't put coffee grounds down your sink.
Probably don't do that.
With grease.
Yeah, with grease. Probably don't do that. I don't want to get in trouble for clogging someone's sink. That's a me thing. All right.
All right, horrible.